They say there are some toys that are impossible to come across, but impossible is just another kind of possible. Several months ago, I set out on my journey to find the Transformers Prime Terracons. My mission was a deadly one indeed, for the landscape is filled to the brim with those wretched clear versions that would shatter into a million pieces upon contact. But I pressed on. I pressed on, for I knew that I had a duty to this channel to give you a full review of it. And finally, come July, I came across the very prize I had been seeking. And it was glorious!
That was awfully disappointing. It's kind of In this day and age, Prime is either considered the best or the worst element of the franchise. You can't really have a middle ground. It's physically impossible to do so. However, that only applies to the media element of the franchise. When it comes to the toys, well, given their weird designs, they're often forgotten. Maybe it's the weird middle ground between G1 and the movieverse and not quite fitting in between the two, but the general reaction kind of pertains to, oh yeah, Prime had a toy line too, didn't it? And of course, this is doubly true for the weird subline known as Beast Hunters. Whilst most of the mainline toys were good, even if they didn't have the budget of the first edition figures that many people desire to the point where we're getting knockoffs of them, Beast Hunters added a whole bunch of unnecessary junk to it and it ended up looking pretty messy. Not even the Cyberverse line was safe. Some of the figures did actually get really ugly upgrades and they didn't look very good. But to its credit, there were several toys that just continued to be made as if nothing had ever happened. One of the biggest surprises, however, was the follow-up to one of the most ambitious projects from Revenge of the Fallen, giving us a brand new Legion Combiner. Because it was split between individual releases, the budgeting wasn't as loose as it was with Devastator though. So, could they still deliver a truly amazing Combiner? Well, greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Prime Abominus from the Cyberverse subline. Abominus is certainly a weird choice for the Beast Hunters line, especially in Cyberverse. Although to be fair, the main scale did have its fair share of oddities, with a bunch of Predacons being produced then never making it into the show, only to have them turn up in Predacons Rising under different colours as a store exclusive. God, the ending to Prime was a mess. Regardless, you'd get what you'd expect from the line. Primified designs of the classic G1 Terracons, not to be confused with the Terracons. Surprisingly, these fellas were pretty hard to track down at a reasonable price, since most of the editions that have flooded the market in recent years are the horrible inferior box set version. Oh, just look at that clear plastic. Isn't it brilliant how in 2 years' time it will crumble into dust? I suppose we should start off with Rippersnapper, only because he's the most commonly known Terracon of the bunch thanks to the abundance of repaints he got, most pertaining to Grimlock, although that being said, I suppose in this case he's just a regular Predacon. Whatever, I'm just gonna keep calling these Terracons because it's much easier. In his new Dragonified design, he does look quite cool. The design, colours, paintwork and mechanical detail are all quite striking. It's clear from the get-go, although not that kind of clear, that the designers didn't sacrifice any of the beast modes for the sake of the other two, a decision that is both a blessing and a curse. We only get two types of paint in this mode, the yellow and the turquoise. Both are done incredibly well. The turquoise matches the plastic colour seamlessly, although whilst writing this script I have no idea if it's going to come across on camera. And the yellow is done immaculately. Considering how much shitty yellow and red paint I've had to put up with over this year, it's really refreshing to see it handled properly on a retail figure. Now I'm aware that the back section doesn't have much cohesion, and the hinge here is clearly visible, but to be honest I don't really mind. It's not really visible from the front or the side, and this is a Legion figure, so it's the only sacrifice that really needs to be made, and I'll gladly take it. And yes, his head is on full display from the underside, but that's pretty much the case with every Legends figure on the planet. And the alternative is certainly not YouTube friendly.
Snooping as usual, I see.
If I had to go over any issues, there really only are a few. One, the legs are way too far apart. I do understand the necessity for the robot and combine mode, and it is negligible from most angles anyway, but it does have to be said. Two, the joints holding the aforementioned legs are awfully loose. Thankfully, they don't go any further than 90 degrees outwards, so it can stand with ease, but they should have been a little tighter. Still, allegedly every release after this version has abysmal QC, so considering the alternative, I'll gladly take what I can get. Finally, no paint on the tail unless you count out this butt-ugly ID code. Still, when you consider as a Legion figure, these mean jack shit in the grand scheme of things. Despite being overused, this mold holds up remarkably well, although only as a Ripper Snapper, not as a Grimlock. Articulation is pretty stock standard, with ball-jointed hips and faux ratcheted arms. If you really want to, you can use the hinges to help him combine to get some inward motion, but it barely counts. For extra posing options though, he does have some neat Cyberverse weapon ports, mainly on his sides and in his mouth. Actually, this mouth-held Cyberverse port is an element shared on all the members, even with Hunger and Twin Strike, who have 2 heads. Very nice touch. Next up, we have Blot, who I'm choosing as the next character because for some reason the oversized Tim the Toyman knockoff used 2 of them instead of going with Ripper Snapper. So Blot...
I think you mean Blight. They couldn't use the name for copyright reasons.
No. So, Blot is unfortunately a little more problematic in his beast mode. I'm really glad they were able to convey the ogre motif without getting too dragony, even with his face having echoes of a Komodo lizard on its design. The paint is, again, done really well, with the pastel purple paint matching the coloured plastic as seamlessly as Ripper Snapper, and although the yellow isn't as good here, it's still done to a reasonably high quality. Unfortunately, given the way he transforms, there are a lot of problems with his design. The main offender would have to be the legs, which feel unfinished and are definitely under-articulated. Why they didn't just leave the fists as moulded pieces and the backs of the legs is beyond me. But when the kibble is so bad you can see it from the front of the robot, you know you f***ed up. On top of this, thanks to the way the ball joints are oriented, you get very little posing power. He's got virtually no outward motion, and even the up and down is a little awkward. Furthermore, as a result of the same transformation element, no pun intended, you end up with these incredibly hollow sections on the side. I don't know why they didn't just bother to fill these in, especially considering the head is one big backpack piece. As I'm writing this, I'm only just now noticing that the shoulders also have the same articulation issues as the head. Come on, the chest transformation is cool and all, but did it really have to come at the cost of the articulation? Beast mode articulation matters, and Ripper Snapper got it right. Well, I suppose it's not all bad. Faults and all, I really do like this design, potentially even a little more than the G1 rendition. For Ripper Snapper, the classic design really seems more characterful, but here I actually like the changes they made. Kudos to the designers. He even has swiveling elbows. No bend, but it's a nice little detail that adds a ton of character. As for his articulation, whoops, I already discussed all the points when I was going over the pros and cons. Cinetwin has undergone the least amount of changes in his beast mode compared to his G1 counterpart.
I'm pretty sure they had to change it to quick switch. Copyright thing is a thing,
Are you just gonna keep interrupting me for this entire video?
I'm pretty sure they had to change the name for copyright.
He's had the least amount of dragony updates to the bunch, or at least he does in this mode. We'll get to robot mode later. I'm honestly shocked they managed to get him to look this good, to the point where you barely even realize he's just a robot doing a downward dog, which is ironic considering he's supposed to be Cerberus minus 1 head. He doesn't have as much paint as his teammates, but the paint is applied really well as per usual. The metallic turquoise breaks the pattern by not matching the turquoise plastic, but it does look really bloody good. The contouring on the back legs is done incredibly well, to the point where they don't even look like they transform. In general, I'd say this beast mode is better than the one we got from Power of the Primes. That's 2 points to Abominus, 1 point to Abominus. Again, the issues are fairly negligible. The tail is a smidge too short and the feet are a tad too large. That's basically it. There's virtually nothing wrong with him. Even the underside looks as clean as a recently vacuumed floorboard. Also, Cyberverse weapons ports galore, which is nice for options. Articulation is also surprisingly solid. You've got ball joints at the tops of each of the legs and on the back feet as well. His tails can move up and down, and his heads are also on ball joints. Could have used more on the front legs, but you can fake it with the hinge that's used to tilt the legs into the backpack. I do find the front section a tad loose though. There should have been a proper locking mechanism on it. That aside though, it's a killer mode and probably my favourite of the crew. That brings us to Cutthroat, who has a beautiful design but problematic construction. I swear to God, if you interrupt me one more time, I'm gonna shoot you.
You're a idiot.
Due to the abundance of paint on the wings, he sadly doesn't get much paint anywhere else. But honestly, I think that choice was a brilliant one. The wingspan looks beautiful in these colours, which puts the shitty Power of the Primes brick to shame. We also get some yellow paint, despite the fact he's moulded in pale yellow plastic. I mean, the effect looks fine, but I can't help but wonder how much better he'd have looked in other colours. Interestingly, they've opted to put the Predacon symbol on the Beast mode, probably because there was nowhere to put it on the Robot mode, due to the immense sculpted detail, and putting it on the wings would have been tacky. What is he, Starscream? Surprisingly, the tail ends up doing a lot more for the design than you'd expect. Without it, he looks like a robot bending over, but with the addition of the illusion, the bird mode is far greater. I love the detail that they've added to the head. Once again, it really makes the G1 design look like a sad sack of shit. All of the extra ridges are appreciated as well. It's something that you get on all 5 of the figures, but I want to mention it here as well. The mechanical detail has been stellar all around. So yes, he does indeed look nice, but with that said, he is still problematic. I wouldn't say he's as problematic as Blot, but he is still problematic. For starters, the legs seem awfully unfinished. Sure, they're far better than the G1 rendition, but when you consider the transformation systems the other figures get, this seems a bit underdone, especially with the robot feet. Maybe some extra paint applications would have helped, but I feel that would have detracted from the wing paint due to the budget constraints. Maybe maybe the Takara version looks better. Oh. From the top he looks fine, but I do wish the head had slotted in a little further to fill in the chest cavity. Considering he's upright a lot of the time, visual presentation from the front should be a key factor. Lastly, you've got completely visible robot hands on the wingspan. I mean, yeah, he's a Legion figure with a limited budget. But again, when you consider that the other members, except for Blot, handle this far better, and that Cutthroat is generally one of the easier Terracons to get right, it does feel a little disappointing. Did he really need 2 sets of hands? Couldn't they have just made the monster claws the hands in robot mode as well? It's not like they're adhering to any sense of screen accuracy. Ah well, even with these flaws, I still really do like him. I think the overall aesthetic, as well as the beautiful paint on the wings, greatly contributes to this fact. Plus, as I've stated earlier, it looks better than the G1 rendition, or at least the Power of the Primes rendition. I don't have a G1 Abominus. His articulation is actually quite solid. You've got a hinge on the head as well as a hinge at the base of the neck. It's supposed to lock in place in this mode, but you can cheat it for some extra posing power. The transformation joints on the shoulder allow him to move his arms down, and he's also got 2 ball joints on each wing. You can also extend each wing on a swivel, which is a very nice touch. The hips also have ball joints, and you get a tail hinge. It's not an extreme amount of joints, but it really gives him some extra personality. And finally, that brings us to Hunger, who takes the furthest departure from his G1 source material. He's gone from quadrupedal to bipedal, and honestly, I kind of prefer the design he had before. Personal preferences aside, he's definitely the least visually striking of the group, and probably my least favourite. The angular sculpted detail is here, but it seems more haphazard than on the others. The necks bend in an incredibly awkward way, and although I understand this for the solidity of the combined mode, I reckon they could have made some slight changes to fix it. The heads have gotten a massive downgrade. They've gone from a staple design choice to easily the least distinct beast head sculpt of the group. They're also placed really weirdly, but that's because they have to fold up and become the feet. I just don't get what's wrong with these arms though. They're far too big and make him look more like a begging dog than a threatening dragon. Yes, they're for the combined mode, but do they really have to be this big? Paint-wise, it's just average. The yellow is done adequately, but no more than that. And the beige works well for color correction, but sadly not highlighting. It does a good job of hiding the robot bits at the top though. I can forgive the tail for being extremely fat, since this will eventually become the combined mode chest. A decision that I actually think is quite neat. But the legs? Come on, they're far too small. In fact, the overall design is almost squished, as if they had a design for a Commander class figure and then shrunk it down into a Legion. Of course, this thing is just a hypothesis, since the amount of evidence is virtually zero. His articulation is alright in some areas and pretty piss poor in others. Each neck is on a ball joint and you get some rotation on each head. The problem is they don't go nearly far down enough, which is a bloody shame. The arms are unfortunately on a single hinge and they're always locked in the same position. I really wish they were separate pieces at the very least, but ah well. Each leg has a ball joint as well as a swivel outwards, which acts as a transformation joint. It's a really nice touch. Finally, you do get some slight toe movement, but it's pretty useless. Overall, it's a pretty stock standard beast mode on a Legion figure, which on its own isn't a bad thing, but in the context of the rest of the set, it's an incredible downer. Overall, it just feels sad in the grand scheme of things, and as for the leader of one of the most horrific combining teams, he really shouldn't. When the Power of the Primes version makes you look disappointing, you know you're up. Size-wise, these modes are actually quite large for modern Legion figures. Compared to the older Legions, they look a little undersized, but compared to many of their prime wave mates, they do tower over them due to the extension of parts. That said, Hunger really does feel like it's in a different scale. This isn't G1 nostalgia, since I didn't even discover Transformers until 2007, but something about it feels off. I really feel this should have been a Commander class figure, and why he isn't one is beyond me. So these transformations range from very interesting to kind of boring, also from very satisfying to kinda shit. But hey, it's a 5-bot set, what do you expect? They're gonna have varying degrees of transformation, obviously. Going in the order of how we reviewed them previously, the first thing you want to do with Ripper Snapper is take this section back here, and make sure it clicks into there, it locks into place fairly nicely. You then take this torso section and do the exact same, and it should all peg in together, just with these 2 pegs and these 2 slots. Locks in ever so nicely. You don't have to do anything with the arms, they just kind of fold down. Rotate these side sections out, and that will allow you to fully rotate these around like so. Very kibbly, but still kind of fun, although I really don't see how this keeps getting reused for Grimlock time and time again. Now, Blot has some really good ideas, but I feel that at such a small scale, it comes across pretty piss poor. First thing you want to do is take his head up like so and lock it into the backpack like that, although it's more of a butt pack because it's in an incredibly awkward position. And then this is where things get a bit difficult. You want to pull this section out and bring up the head, but then you don't push it all the way in. It's almost all the way in, but not quite. That'll allow you to bring these leg sections down, and then you get the head and the torso fully in. I honestly don't know why they have him transform like that, because it just ends up making the whole thing incredibly finicky at such a small scale. Anyway, you bring the legs down like so, and you rotate the wrists from the beast mode like that to form the legs, and that'll allow you to bring up the feet like so. You can then just bring the arms down also like so, and the wrists fold out, but they don't fold out all the way, they kind of just stop midway. The end results ain't that great. Twin is a little more simple, but he is oh so satisfying. He's probably got the best transformation out of the bunch. The first thing you want to do is come back here and bring the feet around. That hides the beast feet on the back and allows you to have the robot feet on the front. You then come to the back here, you pull out these sections here, rotate the entire segment around, and then push it back in. And that perfectly covers up the beast leg. Of course, you do the exact same thing on this side. You leave these tails up, unfortunately they don't do anything, but you do have this hinge here that folds back here to get everything out of the way. That will allow you to bring the beast heads down on the hinges and the ball joints like so. Then what you want to do is bring this section open. Make sure you don't pull the beast legs and the head out in the process. You bring the head up like so and collapse it, and then the beast legs, the front beast legs kind of just sit at the back there. Cutthroat's dead simple. It works kinda, but the robot mode doesn't really benefit from it that much. First thing you want to do is take these feet here and fold them up into their robot mode configuration. When you push the beast head in, it will push out the robot head at the other side, but the beast head just locks into the torso there, and then you bring the head the rest of the way over the top to lock everything into place. And then you fold in these segments here, and the arms just kind of fold down like so. They don't undergo any transformation whatsoever. Last thing you want to do is come around here and bring the tail up. There's a lot of potential in this robot mode, but it's brought down by the paint, but I'll get into that. And then hunger is one big pile of disappointment. The first thing you want to do is bring the dragon heads up to form the feet. You then fold in the arms into the torso at the back there. Bring the other arms, the legs around, the robot arms, and then you rotate them like so, with the feet flipping up like that. The last thing you want to do is get the tail on the backpack to reveal the head. Dead simple, not really becoming of a combiner torso. And the end result is alright, I guess. Maybe just bring the camera back a little bit so that we can take a look at Ripper Snapper. Yeah, I mean, some of them look alright, some of them don't. It's much of a muchness. So with a wide variety of transformation schemes and quality of said transformation schemes, we arrive at the second stop of the Terracon journey. Going in the same order, Ripper Snapper has a pretty average robot mode, but the colours really do sell you on it. The head sculpt is okay, I guess. Like many of the Aligned Continuity Legion figures, the complex head design has to be squished to fit on a tiny sculpted part, and it's a smidge uglier than usual, but given that these are supposed to be the Terracons anyway, you really don't see that as a problem. Yes, the yellow could have been done a bit better, but you quickly ignore it when you realise how well the yellow on the chest is done. And oh my, what a chest we have. Yes, unfortunately you have to deal with the obnoxious pole in the middle due to the combined mode transformation, but given that it has to hide the combining port regardless, they did a bang up job. The arms are unfortunately a tad underdone though. They are far too far out from the main body, but I suppose there's not much they could do as they have to fold behind the leg for, well, leg mode. They could have used a little more paint, but there are budgets to consider. One commendable aspect is the backpack. Despite being a Legion figure, it cleans up remarkably well over here. It looks more like a purposeful element of the robot mode than a forced backpack. Unfortunately, such a choice came at the cost of the legs, or rather the feet, which are total kibble city. It's not the worst I've ever seen on a Legion figure, but it's definitely quite disappointing. Considering it has to become the combined mode foot though, it's pretty easy to give it a pass. And thanks to the way it transforms, it does get some pretty decent posing. On the topic of posing, he's got ball jointed arms as well as a forward hinge that can actually be used quite effectively. He's also got ball jointed hips and a little bit of foot pose ability, but only forwards. He's pretty stock standard for a Legion figure, but honestly after I tried to review the authentics and kind of failed, this is a little bit refreshing. Unfortunately, when we get to Blot, we see that a lot more sacrifices were made. As with the beast form, the robot mode colours are lovely. You get to see a lot more yellow in this mode, which definitely adds a lovely amount of detail to the overall design. Unfortunately, the design itself isn't that great. Although the head sculpt is pretty darn neat, it's very wobbly due to the type of joint they used. Going below that, the paint work on the chest is serviceable, but the proportions are all off. It feels far too segmented, and considering Ripper Snapper had an entire pole going through his chest, he just doesn't have any excuse. The hinges that were also present on the previous member are far too prominent here, destroying any chance of visual cohesion. The curse of the pastel purple sprue continues, with the hands failing to fully straighten out, so it permanently looks like it's giving you a signal that may or may not be homophobic. Point is, it really breaks the visual cohesion, and I wish they'd just let it fold out fully and fully back into the torso as well. Making it go only part of the way just ends up looking stupid. The legs aren't much better either. either. Although the proportions are pretty good, the use of the beast elbow swivel ends up making him look knock-kneed in most poses, even if you're trying to straighten them out. The biggest downside would have to be the kibble coming out of his arse though. Look, I get it, having a Transformer flip upside down is cool, but in this instance on such a small scale it doesn't get a chance to fully shine. If it was a backpack I could forgive it, but since it's more of a butt pack, well, no, I simply cannot. His articulation is near identical to Ripper Snapper, right down to the hinges on the shoulders. The only real difference is the knock knees, instead of the foot pivots, and as I said, it makes him look pretty damn janky. The arms seem to do much better in the set overall, and Sinatwin leads the charge with some awesome design cues. Despite some kibble issues he has, he may very well be my favourite of the whole set. Whilst the head sculpt features a fairly blank expression, the sculpting around said expression is sharp as hell, and the paintwork is beautiful. Overall, I really like the shiny paint they used. Doesn't matter if it doesn't match the colours, it still looks cool as hell. The chest echoes stylings of Prime Starscream, but has loads of extra spikes and edges. Matter of fact, one of the elements that makes this guy so visually interesting is all the jagged edges. They've packed a ton of detail into this tiny little bugger. The arms are quite surprising, because although we're left with hollow sections from this angle, it still works surprisingly well. They may be a smidge too far out from the body, but it definitely works better here than it did with Ripper Snapper and Blot. I especially like the detail they've put into the legs. The outward thigh mass does wonders for the design, and yes, the illusion may be shattered if you look at it from the side or the back, but the detail on these parts is still great. There really are only a couple of flaws I can think of. First off, you've got a rather annoying case of back kibble. Whilst the tail folds up pretty perfectly, the front legs have nowhere to go and look really out of place. They even get in the way of articulation at times, which is really frustrating. It is a Legion figure though, so I can't be too harsh on it, although it is still a little disappointing. What I can be harsh on is the tolerances on the panels of the legs. The QC on these things isn't great. On my copy, one is too tight whilst the other is too loose. This may not affect all copies, but I've confirmed at least 2 other cases in my immediate area, so at the very least, Sydney side has got the short end of the stick. Whilst it's fortunate not to have any build quality issues that affects all of the figures, the luck of the draw aspect really doesn't do it for me. Still, overall, he's a really nice standalone figure. The colours and sculpted detail really help sell you on the ferocity of the design, and his issues are pretty easy to work around. Articulation is a little bit different from the leg components. Instead of inward shoulder hinges, he has upward ones. He also has ball jointed shoulders, hips, and feet. It really works well for posability, and the lack of upward movement in the ball joint is excellently compensated for by the hinge. Good job, Hasbro. Good job. Unfortunately, Cutthroat is far less elegant in this mode. He's not the worst of the bunch, as the surface detail is immaculate. We're left with zero kibble, and the sharp angles work really well. You'd think the feet wouldn't work, but surprisingly they actually do a really good job. The way the head slots into the chest like a bestial seeker works quite well, and surprisingly the wings don't look too out of place either. Not that I prefer these over the backpack of the original, but still, nice job. Unfortunately they messed up in the most important part, the face. Many consider the head sculpt to be the most important element of the design, as it ends up giving much personality to the character. There are a few instances where a figure can be quite good in spite of a wonky head sculpt, but this just isn't one of them. For starters, the yellow paint on yellow plastic finally takes its toll on the design. There's a smirk in there, but you wouldn't be able to tell because you're almost blinded by the paint. Second, the eyes are way too stretched. He almost looks like an Insecticon with the way he's designed. Finally, the yellow plastic washes out any extra detail on the paint. The issue doesn't occur anywhere else on the body, but for some reason you can barely make out anything there. Matter of fact, there's way too much yellow in general. In the Beast mode you have the wings to break up the color scheme, but in the Robot mode the green isn't allowed to properly shine through. It's a real shame because the green really does look lovely. The designers have done an excellent job designing Cutthroat overall, but he's let down by his paint budget and the odd choices of coloration. There's so much nuance here, but it just isn't allowed to shine. Articulation is alright for the size. You've got ball joint to the shoulders, elbows, although they are sadly inward, and hips. You also get wing extensions, which work well for slicing action. You can also kind of fake foot posability with a transformation joint, but it breaks the sculpt, so I wouldn't recommend it. And finally, we get to Hunger. He's alright, not the best, not the worst, just the middle of the road, and that's somewhat an issue. The torso needs to be the absolute best of the bunch, otherwise you end up with problems in the combined mode. And believe me, here you end up with problems in the combined mode. But before we get to that, Hunger looks more like a brawler than a combiner leader. He looks more like a brawl than an onslaught, which is a shame, but whatever, the designers went for that look. The details on him look really nice, but I feel they would have been better if they were stretched out. The dragon heads as feet are an interesting idea, but I really don't like the way the top of said heads are marred with sprue marks. One thing I do really find nice though would have to be the red plastic. For once, we have a shade that doesn't wash out all of the detail, and there's even a nice metallic fleck to it. I also really like the helmet. It's got a really nice half berserker, half samurai vibe going on. I'm also quite pleased to see a nice tidy backpack. Sure, this does become the chest of the combined mode regardless, but the end result is nice either way. Still, regardless of these facts, he does come out looking squished. The arms suffer the most, featuring inward elbows and a bicep swivel that's been completely gimped into a transformation joint and nothing else. Still, at least he can use that joint to pull the Chica dance. The legs are also pretty underdeveloped. underdone. The weird angling seems to work better than it did in Dragon mode, but the lack of paint really seems distracting. Ah well, at least it has inbuilt claw weapons, which look more like slappers than actual slicers. For articulation, you get ball joints at the shoulders and the hips. The feet also rotate a little bit, but they don't achieve much. Real bummer, actually. As far as size comparisons go, for some bizarre reason, Hunger feels out of place. Again, it's not just that he's not larger than the rest, but even in comparison to the rest, he's far too small. He feels like an overly small army ranger, which just doesn't work for his size.
So you're a killer?
Sir, yes, sir!
Let me see your war face.
Our worlds are in danger.
Unfortunately, the process to get to the combined mode is a bit of a mess. A lot of these guys transform rather haphazardly. Yes, they had varying degrees of success between Robot and Beast mode, but here it's just all pretty bad. You'll notice that 3 of the members are in Robot mode and the other 2 are in Beast mode. That's just because it makes it the easiest. Starting off with Hunger, the first thing you want to do is bring his arms up like so, and bring his claws up like so as well. You then come to the feet and rotate the dragon heads down. That will allow you to properly peg these in later on. So the way this functions is that there's this entire hinge here. You basically just move like that. It's a bit hard to show on camera, but the end result is this entire bottom section's like so. And then that's got the big cavity that will allow you to push up the combined mode head, like so. And, that's not a very good combined mode torso, I'll have to admit. This guy's pretty simple. The first thing you want to do is bring down the heads. That's the actual time you bring down the head. You then collapse the legs together. Come around on this side and bring the toes down, which will create some better support. And that's actually it. It doesn't really do much. You may have to slightly open it up to actually access the torso right here. But what you have here is you have a little peg there and a slot there. And they just peg together like so. And then that doesn't really peg together afterwards. It just kind of sits there. It's very easy to come off, so I better be very careful. You then just bring the arms around there now that everything's fixed up. Yeah, the arms don't peg in anywhere either. It's pretty piss poor. The legs are supposed to be the most sturdy parts of any given combiner, and they didn't even bother. Same thing here. Unfortunately, you don't actually push the head down here. It just kind of sits out a little bit here. From here, you come around to the back, and you bring the backpack or the butt pack back here. You've got 2 pegs here and 2 slots in the legs, and they all just sort of peg together. And then that forms the foot. The very lackluster foot that pegs on in the exact same way. There's a clip right there, and everything just pegs together. The torso kind of sits back there and kind of keeps it in place, but not really. It's still a really poor transformation. And again, the arms just sit back there. Why are they just sitting back there? Why don't they slide into the torso or do anything else? That is really, really bad. Transforming Cutthroat here. Wait, no, he doesn't actually transform at all. I guess you can kind of have these around like that as claws and the head like that, but it's really not that much transformation at all. You need to have these on the outside so it doesn't form the best claw, otherwise the kid will get in the way, but really, it's just a bird facing downwards. You'll notice right here that there's slots on each side of the arm, and if you take a look here, you've got pegs on each side here. That will allow you to peg the whole thing together like so. Sort of wraps itself around the whole design, and massively unbalances it as well. Stability issues, hooray! Just what I wanted in a combiner that's basically the size of a deluxe. Cinetwin does feature a little bit of transformation though. You basically bring the panels here into their robot mode configurations and make sure that the feet are fully around like so for the robot mode configurations as well. You can kind of get the claw to look better by using this singular hinge here to make it like so, but it's all ultimately futile. And the end result, well, the results just speak for themselves now, don't they? Well, this is awfully disappointing. Ladies and gentlemen, take a look at your nearest dictionary. Under the definition messy, you should find an annotation claiming that this guy also counts as a definition. He's far from the messiest combiner on the planet, but is certainly the messiest in my collection. He honestly makes Power of the Prime's battle trap look clean. The entire design just seems so haphazard, and after seeing the rather nice individual modes, To get something like this is incredibly disappointing. The feet are probably the most solid element of the design, but even then, they're all contorted in weird ways and barely manage to remain pegged in. The arms at the back don't peg in anywhere, so they're always left exposed and make the robots look like they're performing a Soviet squat from the back. The arms are probably the laziest element of the design. They aren't the worst, but they haven't gone through any transformation whatsoever. I don't understand why they didn't make them peg in or rotate at all, especially considering they put so much effort into the legs, but whatever the case is, the end result is disappointing. Sinatwin is the better of the two by far because Cutthroat's neck doesn't make a convincing claw at all. I mean, yes, the fact that the tail covers the gaps is nice, but in both cases the connections to the shoulders look so tacked on. But none of these issues are worse than the chest. The head sculpt is fugly on a billion levels, with a generic face, a non-distinct helmet, and no relation to any incarnation of Abominus, and barely any paint to differentiate it from anything. Am I supposed to be happy that they painted the eyes? Because I'm not! The chest is designed quite nicely, but it is far too small. Again, it baffles me why this guy wasn't given the Commander class treatment. The thighs look even uglier than they did in robot mode, and the backpack? Why isn't there any? I understand the trend of hating on ridiculous backpacks, but this is the opposite. We need more filled in here. This isn't okay. And why are the joints so loose? A combiner needs stability, so tolerances should be the first priority. When they can't even do that, they f***ed up royally. The only reason he's able to extend his arms properly is due to the balancing on the shoulders, which are comically huge. Honestly, if Hunger pulled his own weight, I could forgive a lot of what this combiner does, but they haven't even bothered to give him the attention he deserves, so why should I bother giving this a passable score? Articulation is pretty lackluster, but given the nature of this piece, I can forgive it. The shoulders are on horribly loose jaw points, and the thighs are on slightly tighter ones. He also has 5 points of claw articulation on Cutthroat, as well as 4 on Sinatwin. Sinatwin also has an extra hinge that works for repositioning the innermost claws. Still, they've got the bells and whistles going without the basic articulation, which is a real shame. I can forgive it in this case because it's a $50 Legion combiner as opposed to a $250 third-party piece. As for size comparisons, it's about the same size as a deluxe, and therein lies the problem. I've said it time and time again, Hunger should have been bigger. The Last Knight did remedy this by developing a new combiner torso, but in the process of doing so, they've removed the beast mode. It's such a shame because I really see the potential for a brilliant combiner figure here, but they've completely squandered it thanks to one member. Combiners are a difficult thing to do, and if one member doesn't pull their own weight, well, the whole thing can fail immensely. Now, it is a real shame that this set doesn't shine as much in its combined mode as it does in its individual modes, but I guess that is to be expected considering that the budget is far tighter between the figures, because they're not being sold as a box set, they're being sold as individual units. It was always going to happen. Still, in spite of their flaws, individually they do make rather good figures. The only one that really disappoints would be Hunger. If they tweaked him a little bit and maybe given him the Commander treatment, maybe he would have come out a much better figure. In fact, we've seen what a proper torso can do in the Last Knight versions of these characters. So I guess all we can do is hope that someone will make an upgrade kit for Prime Abominus at one point, or specifically Hunger, although I could go for some hands and feet as well. Yo, Jesslyn, please, make a kit for him. I'll pay you if I need to. Until then though, as long as you avoid the abysmal clear plastic version that'll break in a few years' time, in fact, I've actually seen broken copies of this in person at meetups, well, you can't really go wrong. They are brilliant individual characters, it's just the overall combined mode that's a bit wonky. But for Legion figures, I guess that's kind of okay. So with that, we're going back to the less intensely edited videos, covering a mold that I have discussed a very long time ago, with 2 repaints of it. Or 2 redecos, I suppose. A repaint's more just paint. Yes. Does this mold still hold up under different colours?